right, basketball showtime. Taylor Corn over there. I'm Jim Dunaway as we get going for another big weekend after Auburn was impressive. Still shocked over the Alabama performance, Taylor. We got a lot to get to, but the season's starting to feel like everyone's finding their groove. We're starting to find out some pretenders and contenders. You've been keeping up with that undefeated chart. I know the winless chart is still now it's two teams. It's only Oklahoma and Arkansas are 0 and 4. How many teams are unbeaten?
Only two. And there was potential for one to remain undefeated because two of the teams heading into the Tuesday night games were Ole Miss and Alabama. So obviously one of those teams would remain unbeaten. And then the other was Auburn. So Ole Miss and Auburn are the last two standing, and we'll see what happens Saturday.
Yep, and those two will try to stay unbeaten. The 3-1 teams will try to stay in the race. That includes a couple of teams, Alabama and Kentucky, who play at Rupp Arena to start the Saturday schedule off. All right, this is the basketball show. You're watching it on Friday morning on the way to work, or Friday evening, maybe Saturday before the games. Early game with Alabama. Let's title this starting conversation. Let's do a mental heat check on Alabama because I was there, Taylor. Everything, I mean, they lost a couple of games. Auburn lost at Duke, Alabama lost a couple of games before they got to conference play. But even with those losses, they were against brands, and nobody ever felt like, oh my goodness, the sky's falling, any of that after those losses. But this loss to Ole Miss felt different because it looked different than anything I'd seen with Alabama. So let's go inside the Alabama heads right now. Where do you think this Alabama team is as they go on the road to play at Rupp Arena, national TV against Kentucky?
I think I think a lot of how this Saturday goes when they travel to Kentucky will depend on how the upperclassmen, the veterans, the seniors, the guys that have, faced adversity before react to this. And that's something that Nate Oates mentioned in the press conference after the game was I'm going to sit down and talk to my seniors, to the leaders on this team. And he said, it starts with me. It starts with the coaching staff because we need to have them prepared. But, that's also something that I rely on our upperclassmen to do as well. And we weren't ready. So I think they're probably disappointed. They're definitely disappointed. And I think that a lot of that disappointment is probably stemming from the fact that they know their ceiling is so much higher than the way they played on Tuesday night. They know that they have the potential to play light years better than the performance that we saw versus Ole Miss.
Yeah, and the stats we've heard a couple of times, but the 21 turnovers, they only shot 47 shots in the whole game. I mean, Nate wants 43 pointers a game. They only shot 47 shots, 4 offensive rebounds, but 2 players didn't look themselves. One of them was Labarron Philon. Did you ever think you would see Labarron Philon 0 of 8 shooting in a game, 1 point?
Absolutely not. And I know he's a freshman, so he's young. So maybe, at the beginning of the year in one of his first few games, I wouldn't have been surprised if he struggled the transition between high school and college basketball. There's a jump. The guys that you're playing against are going to be a lot more athletic and competitive than the competition that you were probably facing in high school. But after we've seen him play as elite as he's played throughout the first, 16 games this season, no, I did not expect it. Wouldn't be
Yeah, and
surprised by a freshman doing that at the beginning of the season in his first few games, but this far into it, no, because of what we've seen.
Mark Sears only hit 2 buckets. He had 11 points, but only hit 2 from the field. But I just go in thinking, okay, Mark Sears is going to be the focus first off. As soon as you sit down, okay, let's game plan Alabama. Boom. Okay, first thing we need to do, we need to stop Mark Sears. So I figure at that point, then other guys have to free up Mark Sears. And that didn't happen against Ole Miss. Nobody else really stepped up and did anything to loosen up Mark Sears so Mark Sears could get his gears going in that game. In just a game where Alabama had no rhythm at all. And credit to Ole Miss defense. That's what Chris Beard does. But mentally, I can't wait to see this game on Saturday to see if it ends up being the Alabama we expect, or if that one loss can turn into two losses, if they're still mentally hungover from that game, or if they use that as a fire under their ass and they come out and play a little bit better. I want to see which Alabama team shows up. That's 11 o'clock coming up this weekend. So if I asked you keys to the game this weekend for you, 11 o'clock, Alabama at Kentucky, give me one thing you'll be looking at. What's one thing that's interesting to you?
One thing that's interesting to me just about Alabama in general is we mentioned that they had 21 turnovers on Saturday or on Tuesday. This has kind of seemed to become a little bit of a trend, not 21, but they're ranked 268th nationally in turnovers per game. They've had 13 games with 10 plus turnovers and 7 games with 15 plus turnovers. So I think that's something that's going to have to be cleaned up. And they're 100% working on that after what happened this past weekend. But we discussed the offensive firepower of both of these teams. I believe they're ranked first and second in the conference in points per game. But then on the flip side of things, they're ranked 15th and 16th in points allowed. So Kentucky's allowing 74.6 points. Alabama's allowing 77.2 points per game. So what I'm looking for from Alabama is to get a hot start. It's hard. It can be hard to get into an offensive rhythm when you're playing on the road. We know that Kentucky's going to have a great home environment.
Yep.
And if you get down early in an environment like that, it can be hard to come back. So I think that they need to focus on, holding their own and setting the tone, setting the pace, and trying to take control of the game from the get-go, because both teams are going to score a lot of points.
Yeah, you said the four-letter word there, pace, right? The pace of play in this one's going to be high. You know your basketball there. Trouble for Alabama is Kentucky's defense is getting a little bit better every game. That Texas A&M team they beat midweek here, they held them to 11 offensive rebounds, which is a lot compared to what Alabama had against Ole Miss. But that's six under Texas A&M's average. So they have done a better job of playing defense. Kentucky has and protecting their rim. So it'll be a challenge for Alabama. For you Tide fans listening and or watching, Jaxson Robinson is the Kentucky player who is on fire right now. He's scored 49 points in the last two wins. And Mark Pope's got 5 top 15 wins. He played at Kentucky. He's replacing John Calipari. When he was hired, little T, I didn't think Kentucky fans were too excited about it, but I bet they're in love with the guy right now.
Oh, he's playing the part. He's pressing all the right buttons. They're starting to win some impressive games. I think that they're in a good spot. And watching Cal lose at Arkansas, they haven't won a conference game yet. So I'm sure that's giving them a little bit of joy too.
3-1 Alabama, 3-1 Kentucky in SEC play. That's at 11. Auburn at Georgia, number one Auburn, and number one in the conference as well. That's 12 noon, the SEC network. Taylor and I will be on one post game on Saturday. It'll be at the conclusion of Auburn and Georgia, which should end. I'll say should because some Alabama games have gone long, but the 11 o'clock game should end. And then the 12 o'clock Auburn Georgia game ends, and we'll go live post game after Auburn Georgia for both reactions to those on wherever you're watching this as a video on our video platforms on Saturday coming up. Speaking of Auburn, Johni Broome out, first game without him. And boy, I said after the game the other night in our post game show that Auburn checked all the boxes. And I want to ask, where did Auburn flex the most? You were there at that game at Neville Arena, the first game without Broome. What was the first thing that sort of flexed the muscle that this team is more than Johni Broome?
My main concern going into the game was Chaney and or Dillon getting into foul trouble. So that's something that I was really paying attention to, because, you're down a guy that typically takes a big chunk of those minutes that those two guys are having to fill. And they finished the first half with a combined one foul. Dillon had one foul. So
Perfect.
that was what needed to happen. And it's not like they were playing a no-name team. Mississippi State's a very good, very competitive team. Being at home did help, but I think Chaney stepping up, that was only his second start at Auburn, I believe. I think one was last season, one was this season. But you think back to the Georgia State game when when Johni went down, I believe 2 minutes into the game with his shoulder injury. He was out the rest of the game. Chaney stepped up there too. So he's proven twice now that when his name's called, he's going to be ready.
17 points, 8 rebounds, 4 blocks for Chaney Johnson. And technically, he was replacing Johni Broome. And by the way, I looked this up. Johni Broome averaging 17 points. By the way, that's what Chaney scored. Johni averages 10 rebounds. By the way, Chaney had 8 rebounds. By the way, Broome averages 2.7 blocks a game. Oh, Chaney had 4 blocks. So it was a statistical wash without Johni Broome in there, Chaney Johnson. That's a flex to me there. That was a big flex.
Absolutely. And I think the test now is, can you do it back to back games? Can you maintain this level of, I mean, they didn't drop off at all. They did not drop off. There was no concern. And I think that a big part of that was Chad Baker Mazara's start. I think it was at 10-0 at, I don't remember how much time had passed, but early in the first half, they got up to a quick start. The environment, electric. And one thing that I noticed, and I'm kind of jumping the script here, but Johni was still impacting the game from the bench. He was on his feet the entire game. Chad, I believe it was during the first half. He fouled right before a break, and he was beating himself up about it a little bit. You could tell he was frustrated, and he went down, sat on the bench. Bruce is getting his clipboard out, and he didn't have his head in his hands, but you could tell that he was disappointed in himself and frustrated. The first person he sits down, the first person over there is Johni. He's in his ear, building his confidence back up, telling him not to worry about it. He's coaching the guys up on the court. So he was not on the court, but he was doing everything that he could from the bench to try and make sure that his team was successful.
We don't expect Janai to play at Georgia, but there's no official timetable, so I will not say he will not play, but we don't expect him to play against Georgia. The first time we can start really putting the Broome watch on, I believe, will be the Tennessee game at home next week. Auburn had 5 in double figures. They forced 16 turnovers. They only had 10 turnovers, and that is an amazing number against a Chris Jans defense. They go to Georgia this weekend, and Tahaad Pettiford is a showman. That dunk he had, the tomahawk, was amazing. You had a graphic out on our social platform this week about Tahaad Pettiford. Tell me a little bit about what you were showing in that graphic.
I've started to call him primetime Pettiford. He plays his best when the lights are brightest, which is rare, especially for a young player. When guys are stacking up their stuff in the stat sheet versus, a mid-major team, one of the pre-conference games that's not very competitive. That's one thing. Auburn has played 6 ranked opponents, or 6 of the teams that they've played have been ranked in the AP Top 25 at the time of them playing. Tahaad has scored in double figures in all 6 of those games, one of them being Houston. I believe he had 20 points in the Houston game, which was the second game of the season. So his second game as a college athlete. But he's averaging 15.8 points per game. He's shooting 51.4% from the field, 47% from 3, and has not missed a free throw in those games. And 2 of those were vital at the end of the South Carolina game.
Yeah, so he's primetime Pettiford now.
He's
I like
primetime
that.
Pettiford.
The Field of 68 podcast says, and I pulled this quote from their video podcast. Auburn looks like they have more fun than any team in college basketball. End quote. Now it's always fun when you're winning, but they do look like they're having a good time. Did you see that drop off any on the Tuesday night when without Johni Broome? Did that team look like it had any pressure on its shoulders at all?
No, Johni was adding to it. He can't really play that role because he's on the court so much. When he was on the bench, he added to it. And I do think, I mean, these guys, they love each other. If you listen to any post game or midweek press conference, when the players are talking, anytime someone is complimented, say I'm asking you a question, I'm like, you had, 25 points, a season high. They're always deflecting and saying, well, so and so does a really good job of distributing the ball. It's all about the team. It's all about praising their teammates. They love each other. It seems like a very close-knit group of guys, and I think that's what makes it look like they're having so much fun. And I think that they are because they're genuinely excited about their teammates' success. They've all bought into their roles. Tahaad would be starting at, a lot of other schools. He's coming off the bench and he's fine with it. No one's complaining
Yeah.
about the minutes that they're getting. They understand that the coaching staff's trying to do what they believe is going to win the team games. And at the end of the day, that's all that anyone cares about.
Yeah, and Auburn at Georgia this weekend is the number one team. Georgia 2-2 in league play. Alabama at Kentucky before that. Around the rest of the SEC, we've talked about depth. I saw one projection of the bracket at the Athletic today that had 13 SEC teams in the NCAA tournament. I think it'll settle around 11 or 12, but right now 13 teams in. And one of them now, Missouri, has entered the chat in the SEC. Missouri goes on the road. They beat Florida this week. 83-82. Dennis Gates' team is now 3-1 in the SEC. Their one loss. Anybody?
Auburn.
Auburn in the first game in the SEC play. They also, not only with the road win at Florida, which was a top 5 win, they once, back when Kansas was number one, they beat Kansas, who was number one in the country. This Missouri team adding to the depth of the SEC. Taylor, like we needed one more good team in this league.
I know. I'm like, I guess it'll make, give another, or I don't know, it may have already been a quad one win. I don't have that pulled up right now, but it's boosting the record or the strength of record of the teams that have beat them. It's making a loss to them not as bad for the teams that have lost them. But the SEC is going to be full of cannibalism. Everyone's going to beat up on each other throughout the next 14 games. I think that's how many games are left in conference play. But I mean, 9 SEC teams are in the AP top 25, and people are going to lose games, but it's not like you're losing to bad teams, is the
Yeah.
thing. Everyone gets beat up over a loss, but if you look at the competition, I mean, you have to expect it at some point.
Yeah, I really, you really got to defend your home court,
Yes.
which is why Alabama losing to Ole Miss was big. Florida losing at home to Missouri was big. And also you had Texas winning at Oklahoma midweek. In that ranking of surprising to me, Alabama wasn't number one. I knew they could lose the game. I just didn't think they'd lose it the way they lost it. The most surprising was Missouri beating Florida. That was by far the most surprising. Ole Miss beating Alabama still surprised me, shocked me the way they did it, but I knew they could lose the game. And then Texas beating Oklahoma, that was a wash. Fun week ahead in the SEC. Other than the two teams we talked about with Bama and Auburn, the best other game is probably 4-0 Ole Miss at 2-2 Mississippi State in Starkville, 5 o'clock ESPN2. They don't like each other, those two
Big
teams.
Bowl.
Yeah, the Egg Bowl on the hardwood. So it's a hard boiled egg, probably Egg Bowl. But Chris Beard is a defensive guy. Chris Jans is a defensive guy. I mean, they might as well put on the helmets and shoulder pads for this one because it'll be a bloodbath. And an interesting note about Ole Miss, now that Beard has that big win over Alabama, shockingly, that was the first top 5 win on the road in Ole Miss basketball history ever. The one
Which
when
is
they beat Alabama.
insane.
That's insane. They've never beaten a top 5 team on the road. They just did that. And they've only been to the NCAA tournament 3 times since 2002. That's an eternity of basketball not going to the tournament. And they're not only heading to the tournament, but they're going to be a very high seed. We'll end this version of the basketball show with the talk about Cooper Flagg, who is now flipped ahead of Johni Broome to be the National Player of the Year. In a moment, I want you to tell me what categories Broome leads Auburn in. But Cooper Flagg is on his way right now to joining a group of 50 players, only 50 players since they kept keeping all 5 of these stats. And that was 1986 when they added steals and blocks to this list. Only 50 players have led their team in every single category. Cooper Flagg is doing that now. He's leading Duke in points, in rebounds, in blocks, in assists, and in steals. There's only one other player in the country right now who's doing that. That's Jax Lindenberg down at UAB. But I was thinking to myself, everyone was like, well, Cooper Flagg, he's going to win National Player of the Year now. And, he's leading Duke in all 5 categories. So I was wondering, how many categories is Johni Broome leading Auburn in?
4 of 5, all but
4.
steals. all but steals, and Chad Baker Mazara takes the cake on that one. But I mean,
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't. I expect Cooper Flagg, barring injury, assuming he stays healthy the whole season, I think he will win.
The National Player of the Year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So Broome leads in points and rebounds and assists and blocks. Only Chad Baker, who has more steals than him. And if it gets
yeah.
close at the end, maybe Chad can say, "Hey, steal that one. Go ahead and get that. Go ahead and get that record there."
I don't know
Uh,
if Chad has it in him. I feel like he's a C get.
I like that. See, get kind of guy. All right, that's our basketball show for this week. A final thought? Do you have a basketball you want an award to your Auburn team that you saw in person? If you had to give just one person a game ball after that Auburn game, who would it have been?
Oof. I think Denver Jones is not receiving enough credit for how well he's been playing defensively. He also has turned into I'm surprised I won't be surprised if he at some point while Janai's out starts leading the team in blocks. I don't know what has happened, but Denver Jones is now a blocking machine. It's crazy. So I think, and I really don't think that he's getting enough credit. He has fouled minimally this entire season. I think that he's averaging, I can look real quick. He's averaging, okay, I'm not actually going to look. So this is going to take longer than I expected. But there were a stretch of I think 3 games where he had no fouls. He's rarely turning the ball over. He's averaging 1 turnover a game. So he's quietly been very very productive for this team. But what I'm looking for when it comes to Saturday's games, I'm very interested, like you mentioned earlier, to see how Alabama comes out. I think that's going to tell a lot about this team. Can they bounce back after that? Because playing Kentucky after a hard loss at home, not ideal.
Yep. But hey, if you get a big win, it makes you forget that Ole Miss
Yeah.
loss really quick. I would have given my game ball probably to Jaron Stevenson, even though Aiden Holloway led the team in scoring. He was out there. He seemed to be, I won't say the only one, but he and Aiden were probably the only two that I feel like I would have graded out as an A when the night was over with. You want my Jim Awkward moment of the week?
Of
Um,
course.
yeah.
Or do I?
Uh, you do, you do. I texted,
Okay.
I sent word to people around Nate Oates just to say, hey, if you've got, 2 tickets right, but those when you're on the road, those 2 seats right behind the visitors bench where you see some, Alabama in this case, those Alabama folks right behind the bench,
Yeah.
like at Rupp Arena on Saturday. I sent word to Nate that, hey, if you got 2 right behind the bench, I'll come up and cheer my ass off for Alabama on Saturday at Rupp Arena. Just let me know. Word
What'd he
came back.
say?
Word came back he didn't have 2 right behind the bench for Jimmy basketball.
Are you surprised? Are you
I
surprised? You think
you got
you think
you
that
gotta
that the
ask. You gotta ask.
you think that the Kentucky athletic department is gonna be like, we would love nothing more than to give the opposing team two
No, no, no.
incredible seats.
No, there's 2 rows right behind where some of the visitors, Bama gets tickets right behind the bench
Oh, oh,
at Rupp
oh,
Arena.
oh, oh.
Yeah, so they're right there. Now I'm
So it's
sure
in
their
their little
guy.
section.
Yeah, I'm sure it's only 2 rows, and it may only be 1 row. And I'm sure every one of those people donate $1 million to NIL or
Right.
something. But
Yeah.
I had to ask. I was like, Nate,
Yeah.
if there's just 2, I'll because I need to bring a friend,
Yeah.
not 1, 2.
You
I'll
can't
come
do it
cheer.
alone.
I'll come cheer my ass off on Saturday. Word came back, Nate didn't have any tickets for me, so.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to work there. I love that place. All right, that's the basketball show. She's Taylor Corn. Like, subscribe, thumb up, comment, all the good stuff with us here. And you know, let us know if you want to hear anything or talk about anything in the basketball show. Remember, we'll do this again Sunday night, Monday morning, and that is all mailbag questions, all DM questions. So be ready on Sunday to fire our questions to Taylor when she sends out the little link there. So thank you guys, man. We appreciate all the feedback you're giving us on the show and enjoy the basketball.